Right.
Okay, let me... okay, done. Thank you.
So
Meow.
Shizong, would you be the role like remind us all if we like pass the time? Like for example, I was thinking 5 time for introductions, and Jane will have 40 minutes, and Posak will have 40 minutes. But we still have so QA session will be 30 minutes, but we still have 10 minutes for, just in case. But if Jane's section is like, past the 40 minutes, you could just text me as a reminder. So we won't go too long.
Okay. Text you or just text in a chat box?
Maybe just text me personally.
Okay, to Facebook.
Yeah. And
okay, sure.
So just like briefly, a very quick note that we're going to start at 7, and then I will introduce this talk and also organizer OCSC, and also introduce Jane and her practice, and then briefly introduce a little bit background of community of parting, and then we will start a conversation. So by asking a few general questions, Jen could present her works and showing some video clips. And later, we're going to follow by Posak's conversation and her screening, right? And then the QA sections for 30 minutes involved with the audience and participants today to raise a few questions. Right. Okay.
Yeah. To the QA section, let's see if there are many questions, but there's always an option that we can be more relaxed, and perhaps if we still have time, I do hope that Jeffrey can share a bit of experience of his travel in Taiwan, in the East, and also in Oki Island.
So after before we enter the QA sections, I will invite Jeffrey to give a few notes about his collaboration with Posak. Is that okay? And then we could open the discussions for everyone.
Sip.
So let me know when we could start.
You can have 3 minutes buffering, and then we can start.
So I was thinking, Shidong, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure.
And then we could, yeah.
I just saw Ellen Cole was here. She disappeared again. its way until 5. Okay. Where's Jane?
I'm here.
Okay. Sorry.好，我们差不多就开始。谢谢今天来到这个房间的大家。对啊，抱歉这个活动开的有点赶，那也很高兴大家还是有看到今天的活动，并且来参与。那这一次的会有这个活动，其中一个原因是之前就有在跟策展人柯念璞聊说，是不是有机会可以让我们可以更多了解，就是来自韩国的艺术家Jane，他更多的作品以及他背后的创作概念。那刚好今年初吧，在跟柯念璞聊天的时候得知，Jane 他有规划说今年要来台湾做研究，然后也延伸至他的创作，所以就在想说，是不是趁这个机会可以让他多认识一些台湾，然后也跟他所要研究的主题就是关于台湾的原住民，然后东海岸以及兰屿可以有更多的接触。那所以想说借由这个机会，让 Jane 可以分享他的作品之余，然后也让Posak分享他之前跟 Jeffrey 在台湾所做的录像的纪录片的创作，然后也借此可以引发一些对话，也让他多了解，也让彼此可以多了解各自的创作，以及更了解台湾。所以对，然后待会可能也麻烦大家注意一下，就是要关掉自己的麦克风以及影像。So yeah, really happy to have everyone here since it's quite a rush to have this event, quite in a hurry. So, but still it's very happy to have Alice as a curator and also the moderator of today. And we have the artist Jane and also Posak to share their work, and also hopefully the upcoming research trip for Jane in Taiwan as well. So I'll give the microphone to Alice for today's event.
Okay, thank you, Shudong, and thank you. Thanks to OCA's invitation. I'm really honored to moderate the panel discussion today, which will be focused on artist Jane Jin Kaisen's significant piece, Community of Parting, and also her artistic practice. And the discussion will follow by Indigenous artist Posak documentary film Lakec, and further discussion with her current projects and upcoming projects, and also her production process of this a very important film about urban Amis. And we are very honored to have Jane with us tonight. And I will take a little bit of time to introduce Jane. So Jane is an artist who works across video installation, film, photography, performance, and text. And her work is informed by interdisciplinary engagements and includes perspectives of individuals working in a wide range of fields, including shamans, artists, political philosophers, anthropologists, and historians. And she's also known for her visually striking multi-layered performative, poetic, and multi-voice feminist works through which past and present are brought into relation. Engaging topics such as memory, migration, borders, and translation, she activates the field where lived experience and embodied knowledge intersect with larger political histories. Now Jane based in Copenhagen, and she's the professor at the School of Media Arts, the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. She was also one of the 3 artists representing South Korean in the 2019 Venice Biennale, and has participated in Liverpool, Gwangju, Jeju Biennale, and among others. She's exhibited extensively internationally and has shown numerous films, festival, and museum. And before we start the conversation, I will also take a little bit of time to briefly introduce this piece of Community of Parting. Community of Parting traces a different approach to borders, memory, and aesthetic mediation by invoking the Korean shamanic myth of abandoned princess Barry, who was exiled at birth, but who becomes the goddess and mediator at the threshold of living and death. Deriving from Kaisen's extensive research into Korean shamanism since 2011, her long-term engagement with communities affected by legacies, wars, and division. The film is composed of imagery filmed in Jeju Island and South Korea, DMZ, North Korea, and Japan, China, and the United States. And I think in this film, Jane treats the myth of Barry as a very gendered tale of migration and marginalizations in a way that is once intersubjective and deeply personal. So I think I'm not quite sure how many participants tonight have shown Jane's works at the Cultural Museum, which is exhibited last year. But I'm really hope like we could invite Jane to share a little bit more her thoughts on this piece and also the artistic practice in the making process. So I will start with a very general questions. For Jane, would you like to share a little bit first about the idea of community parting, the title of it?
Yes, I'll be happy to, and thank you very much, Alice, for your kind introduction. I'm also really pleased that we were able to have this conversation amongst us today. I was thinking maybe what I could do is just share an image of the work or the installation as it was recently shown in Korea. it was a similar presentation at Kaohsiung Museum of Art, shown across 3 screens. So what you see in the background is not Community of Parting, but another work. But basically, Community of Parting has been shown as a film and as a film installation. And when it's shown as a film installation, you see the different images simultaneously. The title Community of Parting derives from a line in the Poetics of South Korean poet Kim Hae-sun, or the translated line where she says community of parting. And so I was really, the myth of Bari is a quite well-known story in Korea. You know, so many people know the story, but it's not as known as a shamanic myth, although that is the origins of the myth or the story. And I had been interested in this myth for a long time. It's basically a myth of an abandoned daughter, or a child who's born the 7th daughter to a king and a queen. And because she's a girl, she's abandoned or discarded and sent away.
Jane Jin Kaisen.
But what compelled me about Kim Hae-sun, who has also engaged very deeply with this shamanic myth and used it in a sense as part of her poetics of feminine writing, is that she takes a feminist interpretation onto this myth of Bari, because although Bari is abandoned, she later goes to the underworld to retrieve the elixir of life, to revive her dying parents. And she's given, or she's offered half the kingdom in return of this gesture. But Kim Hae-sun's take on the myth is that she refuses to accept this offer. And basically she refuses to inherit half the kingdom. And for me, I saw that as a refusal of basically accepting a logic of division. And instead she becomes a shaman goddess who is guarding and mediating the threshold or the boundary between the living and the dead. So I found this really compelling about the story, which in some ways is also a journey. So in Community of Parting, there's a lot of different voices. More than 20 voices are interweaved in a layered way. And so the voice of Kim Hae-sun is one of them. Then you hear many other voices, as Alice was mentioning earlier, of individuals from different fields, also various diasporic Korean women's voices. And a recurring feature of Community of Parting is the ritual chants and performances by Kusunan, Shaman Kusunan. And it's her face that you can see on the back screen in this exhibition image. And so Kusunan was a shaman that I met in 2011 when I was working on another film project about the legacy or the memories of the Jeju April 3rd massacre. And so we developed a quite intimate relation because basically Kusunan is from the hometown of my grandparents, and her father was killed in the Jeju massacre. So she would always talk about this historical event or commemorate the of the Jeju massacre in her rituals. If you would like, I could share maybe a few minutes of the film to give an impression of how the different images and stories are layered.
Yes. Jane, would you like to show a little bit the video?
Yeah, I was thinking I could show a little bit of the video. Another thing I should say is Community of Parting, while it deals with shamanism, it's also very much a work about borders or sort of trying to approach borders in a different way. And with borders, it's both the gendered borders, but it's also the geopolitical border, the division of Korea, and so it also engages both the division itself, but also some of the many forms of migration that have occurred in the throughout the 20th century, basically from Korea as a result of colonial histories and division and war. So this short clip that I will show, which is the beginning of the film, also gives a little bit of an impression of how these stories in a rather fragmented and layered way are composited. So I'll just share a new screen. I think it would be this one. And let me know how the sound, like if there's any problems with the sound of the image. Whoops. This one. There is a story that has endured division, yet is as old as division itself. It is the shamanic myth of the abandoned princess party who was exiled at birth for being born a girl. An initial story of gender transgression, a core motive of the myth is resistance and restoration, arriving through the figure of the other. What distinguishes the abandoned is a refusal to abide by human borders, to become instead the goddess and mediator at the threshold of the living and the dead. Within sentiments of border keeping, the diminishing of other knowledges and partial remembrance, the abandoned delineates a different approach, gathering and mediating what has been torn. It is one of diffusing boundaries between past and present, self and other, here and there.
And would you, is it possible to make it full screen?
It's not full screen?
Not yet.
Is it now?
It's, I think it's better, yes.
Okay, sorry.
파리공주 무가는 신화죠. 그래서 한국의 전통적인 무교다, 샤머니즘이다 이렇게 얘기할 수 있고, 그래서 샤머니즘을 여성의 종교다, 여성을 위한 여성의 종교다. 무가의 구성은요, 역사의 피 맺힌 역사, 우리가 또 분단의 역사, 또 여성의 억압의 역사, 또 계층 갈등도 포함을 해서 이 모든 것의 어떤 신화적 오리지널 텍스트는 바리공주 무가고, 바리공주 무가는 지금도 계속 새로운 해석을 필요로 하고
Body is not a name. It simply means abandoned. The sentiment of the abandoned searches between speaker and listener, teller and tone. Constantly evolving, no one can claim its root. It is many, since each teller infuses her own life story into the telling of the abandoned.
하나는 완성적인 사람이었어요. 연변당 앞에 북한 사람이 브로커를 만나가지고 한 달 이런 거 다 가르치고
Both my parents were originally from North Korea, and they fled after the division before the war.
내 친구가 유엔 클럽에 가자고 그랬어요. 거기에 미군들도 많고 한국 사람들도 많았어요.
When my parents, when they first came to the U.S., came through Los Angeles, and my mom was situated in the garment district in downtown LA, working in the factories there.
우리는 옛날에는 처음 물질러서 굉장히 육지 가면 전하는 거는 뭐냐면 못 사는 사람으로 봤어요.
Вот эта вот депортация о том, что наших родителей насильно сюда переселили.
Soviet Koreans migrated from Korea before the division. It was a forced deportation by Stalinist regime from Russian Far East to Central Asia and Kazakhstan.
시대가 폭발해서 이렇게 쓰러지니까 군인 아저씨들이 와서 저를 지혈을 하고 이제 부대도 옮겨갔어요.
이제 봉수를 얼마 하러 다니고요. 우리 할아버지는 유대는데 비킬까봐.
Joseon is a regional name of Korea before they separated. Many of my relatives still keep this North Korean nationality in Japan for resistance.
Growing up as a teenager in West Berlin meant to live in this island. Some people had family and family, but I did not, or my adopted family didn't.
이쯤 됐는데 이렇게 정전이 났는데 나는 거기 모여서 그렇게 가겠지.
もちろんやむを得なく自分の意思とは関係なく、あるいはあるやむを得ない理由によって動いている活動として逆に動いていくしかない。生きてる肉体という問題と現実の抱えてるあるいはその過去その透き通った
다리는 아버지의 영토가 닿을 수 없는 장소를 스스로 개척 포기하고 아버지의 공동체 밖에 매 순간 되풀이되는 이별의 공동체를 상정하는데 이 지점이 다리와 다른 신화들과 분리되는 다른 여성 신화들과도 분리되는 지점이다.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the, Korean 20th century history, like so many other places, have been marked by, just like a lot of turbulence and forms of violence and divisions and borders. And I think what drew me to the myth of Bari is that in a way she's a mediating figure, who brings together, both the living and the dead, but also diffuses the distinction between subject and object and here and there, like past and present. And in a way, from observing, so it's also a kind of interpretive, I think I was trying to, based on having observed these various shamanic rituals in Jeju and how Jeju shamans are very committed to recalling what I would call marginalized memory and bringing it to the surface, the marginalized memory, for example, of Jeju April 3rd, and also histories of people who had been victimized, or who somehow had not been recognized in official history. And in some ways, the shamanic ritual itself is a summoning of all these different people and events and spirits. And in some ways, I think the way that Kim Hye-sun also works with it, when she talks about how Bari as a myth constitutes a community of parting. I mean, I found that line really beautiful because it's both speaking to the, like, actually a gathering or a summoning of those who have departed or are departing, you know, but a kind of coming together of all these different lives and stories. So in a sense, the film, I was trying to do something similar with the film by bringing together voices of people who really speak from many different life experiences and geographies, but who somehow share in common that they all reflect on different aspects of the myth of Bari, both as a myth of abandonment and marginalization, but also as a myth that actually speaks to overcoming this social condition and insisting upon another way of understanding reality, or, you know, the circumstances in which we're living, that in so many ways are marked by borders and division, but, you know, how can those be imagined otherwise?
Yes, I think I'm not quite sure how many of the viewers are really familiar with Jeju history, but I think Jeju Island history is kind of plays a very significant role within this kind of context of Korean modern history, and also the division of Korea. And I think Jane's a lot of works, and like through her artistic career, kind of touch upon the issues with many ways. But I think community of parting, this piece really bring together another perspective by using the Bari mythology as a kind of major structure of this piece, kind of bring a new perspective, understand this kind of abandonment and how we deal with this kind of the trauma histories and deal with this kind of diaspora as well. And so I was wondering, would you be able to elaborate more on your approach of Bari and how you adopt it as a kind of work by interpreting the 3 deaths in the Bari mythologies? And also, I think one of the collaborator, Korean poet Kim Hye-sun, is quite inspiring about she reinterpretate about the Bari mythology as well.
Yeah, I can try. I think for me, and this is also something, the Bari myth, the way that community of parting is loosely structured is that it speaks of the multiple deaths of Bari, you know, so loosely. The myth itself speaks of, you know, Bari somehow dies several times, symbolically or also in a sense concretely, but the first, one could say that her first death is a kind of social death when she is abandoned and she is somehow banished from the community. But then her second death in community of parting has to do with sort of like, there is a transformation of this understanding of abandonment. And I think this was important for me to think about also that, because oftentimes I think there can be a tendency to sort of when we think about questions of victimhood and somehow maybe also locking subjectivities into this position. But with Bari, there is this somehow abandonment gets transformed from a position of social death into actually becoming an agent. And also Bari in the myth herself, the transgressive force, I think, is that she, it's a choice, she refuses to accept a divided premise, she refuses to accept half the kingdom or human-made borders, and instead she becomes someone who creates affinities between others who have likewise been abandoned or othered in different ways societally. And then the last death, metaphorically speaking, is where she somehow discards her own selfhood and becomes part of, becomes a mediator, becomes a mediating figure. And there's a short part of the film I could maybe end with showing, where you hear the voice of Kim Hae-sun, who also talks in this short sequence. She talks about the various deaths of Bari, and also how within the shamanic ritual, how the border, like the temporal borders that are erected, somehow are diffused or destabilized in the shamanic ritual itself, because it's a space where the living and the dead and the past and the present are able to somehow come together. And it's a short clip that follows a scene with a shamanic ritual of Kusunan. And then we are at the beach in Jeju Island. Yeah, I think I will show that clip.
무당이 되기 위해서는 버려짐의 과정을 겪어야만 돼요. 자신을 이미 사라지고 다른 죽은 사람이 자기한테 들어오는 경험을 해야 해요. 그 경험이 없이는 불가능한 경험이라는 것을 바리가 보여주죠. 무당의 그 연희에 대해서 죽은 사람을 여기 불러온다는 것은, 나의 시간에 죽은 사람을 데려온다는 것은 시간에 대한 무한한 자유를 갖는 거예요. 퍼포머가 죽은 사람을 환기한다는 것은 지금 그때 그 시간에 나랑 같이 있는 것을 다시 사는 거예요. 그는 이미 죽었지만 그런 것이 이 무당의 역할이거든요. 그러니까 다시 불러오는 거죠. 그런 것처럼 끝없이 사라짐을 불러오는 거죠. 그러니까 바리의 죽음 안팎에 있던 시간들을 가져오는 거죠. 타임슬립이라고 말할 수 있죠. 그런데 단골이 따라올 때마다 계속 다른 창작이 생기는 거예요.
지금까지 바리공주 무가는 버려진 딸이 특히 아버지의 목숨을 구해서 나라를 구했다. 그래서 효녀의 이야기로 알려져 있어요. 나중에 아버지를 살려냈지만 아버지가 제공한 이승에서 반을 누릴 수 있는 어떤 지상의 권력을 제공을 했지만 그것을 거절을 하고 나는 이미 한 번 죽고 이승과 저승을 두 번이나 왕래를 한 이승과 저승을 쉽사리 옮겨 다닐 수 있는 특별한 능력을 가진 무당으로서 그러한 사제로서의 역할을 스스로 임명을 하는 거죠.
Pari refuses to inherit half the kingdom. She refuses polarity. But simultaneously, she establishes a bond. In her second death, she enters a hall of mirrors. She sees individual death mirrored in collective death, individual loss mirrored in communities of loss. To abandon abandonment, the abandoned does not abandon. She turns water into elixir. This involves a commitment to another community, to those among the living and the dead, othered by the borders and erasure that abandonment creates. She descends upon the records. She descends upon the ground.
Thank you, Jane. I think I would use a little bit time at the end to really talk about your approach in this film. It's kind of like amazingly, beautifully translate different historical time and contemporary moment into this film. This kind of the film kind of like create a kind of room or space like out of the linear timeline, but beautifully composed together. And I was curious your thought and approach between this kind of video and historical time. Would you share a little bit about the ideas and conceptions of time in your works? And also, I think the same issue touch upon what we previously discussed about translation as method. And I think translations not only consider about the language, but also about the historical narrative, the victimhood, and also this kind of memory as well. So I think translation plays a very crucial role in your practice. Would you share a little bit your thoughts on this as well?
Yes. I think in many ways, I mean, community of parting and my video and film works in general, there is a big investment in somehow in challenging linear notions of time. And so community of parting as such is very much, I think, configured in a rather cyclical way, you know, so it returns to, it begins with the ocean, it returns to the ocean, it is framed around recurring rituals and chants. So, and I think within the montage sequences themselves, there's a lot of connection made between different historical times, as you say, you know, so these kinds of reconfigurations of temporality. I think I agree that I think it's very connected also to the notion of translation. And that was another part that was really important for me as a kind of starting point for the work. Translation from Latin, it etymologically means to carry across or to bear across, you know, so it's a word that often is thought of in spatial terms, you know, like from one place to the other. And it's a term that carries certain colonial legacies and that has been problematized also by various post and decolonial scholars, because it's another kind of border keeping function, the mode of translation, because it oftentimes will create hierarchies between different spaces. But one of the things I was really interested in with the shamanic is also that it's oral history and oral knowledge and memory. It's not scriptural knowledge. And so another way to understand translation is in certain cultures, for instance, in Sanskrit, the word for translation is temporal rather than spatial, you know, so it connotes to repeat or to say after, you know, so there is this kind of repetition of an oral memory. And I think this is something that is very tied to the shamanic as a practice of recalling you know, histories and memories. And so actually to trace, I guess, like another genealogy of translation to oral history opens up, you know, like a whole new way also of a different approach to questions of memory. I think the end of Community of Parting, there is this chant where Shaman Kusunan, she mentions or recalls all these various like violent historical events. So there's a way, but she ends with the Sewol ferry incident, which is like a very recent tragedy in South Korea. You know, so there's this way that oral history is able to, because it's open, you know, it's able to accommodate you know, potentially, you know, like it's an open structure that's able to accommodate events as they occur. So I think, yeah, there is it's interesting to think time and translation in relation to each other, because I think there is something about, you know, that border keeping functions are not only geopolitical, but you know, how we have to consider them also as that there are also border keeping functions in terms of how we perceive certain histories as being of the past and others as being part of the present, for instance. So I think this is something that the shamanic, at least for me, I mean, really opened up a deeper consideration of, you know, that these categories of spatial and temporal distinctions somehow need to be, yeah, renegotiated as part of a contestation of colonial modernity.
Yes, and in the film, when I watched the film numerous times, the oceans, oceanic scenes and the waters kind of play a very crucial role as well. And from my understanding, this kind of water as a metaphor related to the Princess Bari's mythology. Water kind of create a kind of a space for negotiations and also mediations for this kind of abandonment. I think it's very important, a crucial structure in this video and your aesthetic approach in this film. And I think we might bring this discussions later in the Q&A sections. Yeah, and because I think this panel discussion related to you and Posak also touch upon different kind of artist approach, try to using film as an methodology to negotiate with certain historical time, and also this kind of diaspora in a way, and try to create a new narrative or new knowing interpretation of different identities and diaspora, and also this kind of territoryship. So thank you, Jane, once again for being very generous about your time. And we will bring further discussion in the later QA section.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. And so right now, the second half of this panel discussions, we will love to invite Posak to share her documentary film work. And also before we're showing this work, I would like to invite Posak for a short discussions related to her artistic practice and making process of this film. So I will take a little bit of time to introduce Posak and for everyone. So Posak is a member of Amis people living in Taipei, and Posak is her name, and Jodian is the name of her father. With her background of the anthrolinguistic and communication studies, Posak mainly used the documentary film and her background plus the long-term field studies to pay attention to the shaping of traditional territories and focus on the indigenous people who are away from home and live in the urban city. So Posak arrived at the site of each mass movement and take part in all the possible activities that young people do in the city's restricted space. She continually collects the raw materials of image to film the documentary social practice, changing from going straight to the halfway cafe. She tried to use ethnic groups and cultural development as access to broadened and boundaries between identity and recognitions. And today we're going to show the Lakec. Sorry, I'm not very apologize about my pronunciations. So this documentary film is the inspiration from the memory of Posak's childhood memories of the Amis people who live by the water, and her younger brother who comes to work in Taipei from her hometown. It traces the experience of many Aboriginal young people and even the previous generation who leave home and try to survive in the city. Further, Posak connects Futant River from her hometown and the Shabitan that is next to the Xingdian River with the image of flowing. Through interviews and oral storytelling, myths and songs delivered by the tribal people of two places, it depicts a picture of the formidable space and life between migratory nomadism and the river journey home. And so I will also ask a very general questions to Posak. After I watched this film, kind of very inspiring and curious about Posak, your personal experience as a third generation of Amis, urban Amis live in Taipei. And would you share a little bit your experience as a kind of motive and the beginning of producing this film?
Thank you, Alice, and everyone is here. And my family for me is like already like they are like because it can go back past my grandfather's generations, because in my village, Fataan village, I'm from Fataan village, it's an Amish tribe, and in my village we have a really big sugar factory in my village. Actually, people in my village, we will call us, our families, like kids from the sugar factory, because from my grandfather's generation, he already moved a little bit to the factory. So already in that generation have already moved home from the original center of the village of the Fataan. And to my father's generations, he likes others friends of him or the people of his generation, because in that time Taiwan is like have many things wants to build, have a lot of workers outside of the countryside, especially in Taipei. So he's like that kind of generations. And in the city side, they need a lot of workers to build a house or buildings in the city. So they need a lot of workers there, or even to create a highway from the city side to the countryside. So it's my father at that time, he asked young people in his generation, he come to Taipei to work and join to building the house like other people do in the Amish tribe. Many people work in Taipei to have a work of building a house for people in Taipei. So in my memory, when I was a child, it's like I always have my father's friends who live in the city side and always together in the Taipei, and kind of have like link the lifestyle kind of link to the life in Hualien, like in Fataan, and always together and always find a place can catch the fish or can get a wild plant, or and I always have this kind of lifestyle. And I always have the memory like have two kind of life, like between the Fataan and the city side with my father's friends, or like it's like they have a little groups in Taipei. Their lifestyle is so different with the others' lifestyle, because you cannot tell the other people. I can feel the difference with the other people live in Taipei. So that's like also like a start point when I start to think about this film. So I want to link with my original home village, Fataan, with the Xiaopitan, the little village beside the Taipei's river, the Xinjiang River. Yeah.
I think very interesting part in the film at the very, very beginning. Actually, one of the interviewers also speaks about like when they try to find a place to stay in Taipei, they will seek to the place along the river, because the connections and living style is deeply connected with the river. And would you share a little bit about that part?
The boy I shoot in my film actually is my brother's, and he's the one always want to find a new place to fishing, or either he's in the city or in Bataan. You always want to do this kind of thing, and this village is also built or created in below the river. Actually, this Indian River have several different Amish village built there because they just close to the river. It's easily for them to catch everything in the life. And also, I think, yeah. And I think because it's riverside and it's like in the age of the city side, not so many people wanted to, at that time, not so many people want to live beside the river. So they find this place really similar to the place we used to have in the Bataan. So when I go to the Shapitan village, I go to village because my brother and also my father's friend, one of my father's friend, he lived there because he, like my father, he already worked in the city many years ago. So he find this place is really, how to say, similar to the original village that we have, the Bataan village. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very very interesting. We could say the urban armies or circle, like the indigenous people moved to Taipei City to seek jobs or surviving in Taipei. They kind of witnessed the modernizations in the Taipei city. And we could also say like the river actually witnessed the urban armies. They're living the past decades in Taipei, because as Posak has saying, like there are so many villages like live along the rivers. I think that's a very interesting connections between urban armies and the river. But also when you trace back to the Hualien, your hometown, you found like another perspective, like way more back to the traditional culture of Amis and their very profound relationship with the water and the river. And really interesting about there's a scene in the film, the waterfall. Would you share a little bit about the history background of that specific site of the waterfall?
Actually, the waterfall we will see in the video is called Tilifunan, and actually it appears in my film many times. But through the different people and different generation, they will give this place different name because for them it's changed a lot of this place, and because like it's originally what I heard from the old people in my village. They said this is the place they do the ceremony for calling the waters coming, and people always coming to this place to catch the fish or shrimp or crabs, something like that. It's like a place you can always find the food and gathering for other peoples. But in my father's memory is already lost. They already lost the ritual of the calling fishes ceremony. Well, in my father's generation, they already don't know this kind of ceremony in this place, but they still have this place like original, because it's in my film. It's already like you can just see a little waterfall in their place, but as the old people say, they used to really big water, have several waterfall and have a really like a lot of water in there. Always find many food there. my memory is always like when you see in my video, it's always like a little waterfall, just a little place. So you can swim there like that, and we call that place Dutch. Dutch is like a big pond in English. So we not really call this place Silifunan anymore, because sometimes we always lost the link with the language also, and with this place we only have this little waterfall left. And so and it's interesting because when I'm doing this film, not only I just learn from the old people what's the originally function or original what they seeing this place, because it's originally supposed to be calling the water to come in the place to have this kind of ceremony. But they also tell me like our original what's story, like where is the Fataan people's coming. So they tell me a story, and you will see later in my film. They will tell a story like there is one girls and boys, they are brother and sister. They used to live really high mountain, that place called Zatulaan. And because there is really, at that time, there is a really big waters coming, like full of all the place. So they take a boat to another place. So the old people tell me where is the other place, and one is this place called Silifunan. So this originally is from, they still can tell me where is the Zatulaan, where is the mountain. So originally they follow this river from the Zatulaan to several places, then to Silifunan, and later become the Fataan. So when I follow the river, the stories is also coming through the old people. I know what's the original way from of the Fataan's people.
Yeah, I think later if we watch the film, I think it will be like a very interesting journey. Like from my understanding, Posak, your tribe have a long history way back to the Japanese occupation period of time. And if my memory is right, that's the first beginning that the people have to like move away from their hometown forced by the Japanese government. And we could like trace from that time to the modern, to the contemporary era, to trace this kind of indigenous people forced to leave their hometowns, and also like have to move away to the major city like Taipei to survive, to seek jobs. So that's a kind of long journey away from home. But watching your film, it's kind of a journey using river as a method to tracing back to this kind of a memory and histories way back home. So it's a very interesting timeline, and your artistic approach in this film create this kind of very, I think it's a very important aspect of this urban Amis. Which before we start screening the film, would you like to share a little bit the reason and your approach using film and using video in this artwork?
Originally, I just wanted to like because I have a cousin, my brothers always have a new place can vision. So originally, I just have this idea. Maybe I can follow him to know where he's fishing with the city side or the countryside. And but as I do this project, I start to think about at the back time, I used to work with my friend in Bataan. We try to do the cultural mapping, we try to do the map in Bataan to know what's the old name of Bataan. And I remember the old people tell me, if you wanted to know the original place or the old name of Bataan, you need to follow the river because it's always people always follow the river to how to say, to move, and also because the environment will get more affected by the environment very easily, so it's always follow the river to live, and also follow the river you can know the history of this place. So I kind of link these two parts together, and also for me, the Xiaobitan, the urban Amis people that I speak in, they are also they start a new place just beside the river. It's just like a start point of how people used to find a new place, how they survive or how they live there. And so I wanted to link this kind of two places, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Posak, and thank you for sharing all these amazing ideas and experience. I think I would like to bring more questions at the Q&A sections. And before we start the Q&A sections, we will start screening for 20 minutes for this film. Would you like to share the film?
Okay. Okay.
Inatira sa to Epeli Hau, yan naruto kiray yan natakara, way ruto kao. Susin numita o Bataan.
So, nakahayang matulis kila seti, magagaw to dogang nagkaturaan.
我陈彦迪，本站的名字叫迪外，住在光复乡，上来台北打拼了4年，3年左右，还是花莲好啊，还是想回去啊。部落是法达岸，还有拉索爱2个部落。哎呦。就是很快嘛，很急促的感觉，没有像在花莲很浪漫的感觉。一样住在新店的部落，小碧潭部落。
为什么要住那边？
因为同学的家在那边，大家都是每一家都会烤肉啊，还有酒醉的啊，还有吵架的啊，还有很多狗会叫啊，整条街大概都认识啊，都会打招呼啊。
你有参加过他们的丰年祭？
有啊，我们青年那边的青年只有3个人，是我跟我同学3个，青年会3个人而已。走出小碧潭就没有那种很浪漫的感觉，你知道的。
桌干嘛的？
我教你们
们跳勇士舞，教你们跳勇士舞。
不是勇士啊。
可以啦，我还不是嘞。
工作啊，因为我们工作是不一定都在台北啊，就是有时候在台中啊、高雄，所以我们都在外面租房子，这样也是不一定会常常在台北啊，这样跑来跑去。房子差不多30年了，然后他们买的时候就盖我们这边的，盖对面，然后差不多来的时候3、4年前来的。
之前帮他管工人吧，哎呀，结果管到后面我自己要下去做事。哎呀，说到这边还不错啊，因为我觉得跟好朋友一起工作那种感觉很好，跟外面那不一样。
就是我们一起工作，所以他们也不会在外面租房子。小时候有时候2个月在基隆，2个月在台中。对啊，这样租房子也不好啊。你这样跑来跑去的，所以我回台北，他们就跟我一起回来。哎呀。
所以在阿美族社会都没有乞丐的原因，是因为大家会互相帮助。所以一旦有这个讯息说，哎，对，北部这边台北有一些工作啊，你们要不要来？而且有薪资也很高嘛。那原住民的强项就是很会盖房子，体力很好。所以呢，他们的爸爸就是第一代啊，第一代就来到台北来。你看这个阿华，那是阿华吗？阿华小时候啊。那是阿华吗？对呀、阿华跟他的那个啊，不是，那不是耿鲁了，就是嘎露露的小孩啊。不是了，叫阿美。哪一个阿美？曾思婷。曾思婷的阿美哦。曾思婷的阿美跟那个现在被关的林克，不是林克死掉了，另外一个吗？林克被关了，还没出来啊。他是林克吗？不是呢，另外一个呢。他们都已经很大了哎，看，你看这条路。这好像是林克哎，这条路是这样子，旁边就是直接是菜园，菜园旁边就是住家。要先砍草，好，全部砍完之后烧掉、弄掉之后，石头才会出现。石头出现就是这样，就会变这样。那你要去整理这些石头，这些石头全部都要整理，把它叠成这样子，弄成围篱。因为我们不会去乱丢石头，我们会把石头排得很整齐，然后把它弄成一条路，等于就是一个堤防。阿美族盖房子的逻辑，你就是靠河边，我们就是要筑一个堤，对，然后方便下水，也方便上来，然后又可以旁边又有一条路，就是筑成这个旁边才有路可以走啊。对。才有这个小朋友可以站的地方。
所以以前那个时候会常常
石头路，这个就是石头路，看到没？后面就是那个河边啊，
很近哎，那个。
对。以前很近的。
所以那时候还没有水没有电，就是这个时候。
对。
就下面取
旁边就是菜园，然后在里面一点就是房子。那菜园一定要离河边很近，为什么要灌溉？对，所以要灌溉就直接到河边去舀水、挑水去灌溉菜园，自给自足。所以阿美族的房子盖的一定会有菜园，如果是靠河边，第一它会有菜园，然后会筑一条范围，我的范围，我住的那个范围。一定会有菜园，菜园一定很宽很大，所以开垦不是那么容易的事。
好像80几年了，人家说那个地要回花莲了，阿公说好，以前很低啊，在铺那个地啊，那个土啊比较高一点，我后面那个矮的会淹水，就这样啊。就20坪，不是那个手拉布啊，那是铁皮的，好像比较宽，20坪四角形，就这样啊。还好那个阿公围这个那个菜园，以前也是到那边哦， 水利局说不要种菜了，种那个公园了，大家都没有种菜，还好我们这个有剩，就种到现在。去年只有生一颗而已。
你应该采得到这颗。可以。等一下。Ilan sana chilipanan ri iayaw away hukularan kirahaw rungso ang san turutok makat pakainihan sani rungsong turutok ang mat way nalalan nian ri mamang hukularan kirah ri wani kanu matuasay kufukrah mataraw katabih kutan wawa ni hakrong ri ira ko paralanay amato asay itira sa katayraan ichilipanan ato sikyapsay isarumaan ta isa para ira ko riparaan sari sa iho ka maumah itira ichikyapsay iayaw tiraho isarumaan isati sa sawari
Kakak kubai bahe usaba kirobana ina cucianga.
Malah ya cara.
Harapin to tachiwawa cara to omen soy patanda nakupuna sonaten sulai tera.
我们的祖先从那个扎州的安这个地方，然后到马恩亨，然后到吉加夫塞，到萨罗马岸，然后再下去还有一段，然后再发现那个一段以后才下去，第五站、第6站才到马达安的老部落，不是一下子从山顶就下来。
加油啊！等一下，一人1收就好了。 不会呢，3维远这种怎么会去游泳池玩水？是要去海边啊。那就攀去山水那里。从第3到第1，有怪手呢，在挖吧。兴趣大家都是去玩水的，小时候没有智慧型手机什么的，都是玩那个天然的，纯天然的。
马来西亚都没有水，怎么让你玩水？
我都不知道。马滩溪，然后我们俗称第1水门。
这个前面那一条才刚刚没有多久，刚养的。改变方向方向对，视线到方向。
水。现在盖桥之后，这边也是水闸门。第一个水闸门，然后那边第2个、第3个，然后最上面是大池。现在去大池。
约小学的同学，寒假或者是暑假，或者是连续假期的时候，就跑这里来这里玩水，我们就从转到这里抓河蚌，跟那个叫蛤来这里玩水，顺便抓一些蛤回去煮汤，大概是这样。也大概这里已经大概50几年没有过了，大概50年左右。毕业以后在外面读书。然后一直都很少，然后就业就从来都没有过。那这个最近来的是1个月前看到这个进展，下面又整个 整治过后，就跟以前就完全都不找不到以前的样子，所以感觉上，能够找到的记忆其实很少，只是凭着那个脑以前的记忆去回忆以前的事情，大概只能够这样。因为那个潭以前这个下面这个潭是非常大非常大的，所以目前的话变成一个等于说小溪这样子流下去，基本上是这样。
没有改变，没这个什么体力不难是体力不难啊，现在呢去年有改了，我们县长给红人都给他要改了，
给他做游戏区
不一样啊，以前是
一个潭，
给他按呢给他给他
找那个棒那个，
给他嘛，我的我答案给他还。
从萨罗马岸以后，再过去呢，还有一个湖水，那湖水就是现在吉利潭。在上次吉利潭落成典礼的时候，我说跟我们的传说不同了。他的那个解释说，这个吉利潭是日据时代日本人要人工挖掘的一个水，他们在山上砍伐木材，要放那个木材地方。我说跟我们的传说完全不一样，那是后来他们那个汉人的观点所以我说上次我还跟我那人讲，我真的要拿红旗把它拨，哪天被拨红旗可能就是我。
Hatinti ni kuhya kira ma nga. Si hatini kuhya kira rimaan nanumita ko semakta maurat sinaada unyaro awa ay kunanum manto kunanum na unip awa ay kusawatan nuruto kira kunanum iayaw situ kamatini ira kunitsusu yay maawri tunika ko ri utabarong matira ko semakta ni saurat kinamato asayri itira ichiritan mahaan ta sa asa to ani ni hiya ni sika ni niftik sa iraan ni haan ta matinito sabuto 10点sa irataraan sausang 10点tangasa sa to iriantin to siyaw to manto ko karayan kira tamaurat ta ansika pisa urat kuno bataan amato asayri wa ay kunanum no tabarong ato numitati ni ay san kira na siritan hananay upisa uradan no mato asay kira na siritan iayaw
ni ana ni han ni amadita wa sagway wa ita masasi siya ni anta hajimete ikat aurat mauraday mahani ayaw mingo 37年38年都没有下雨，很困难，没有水啊，但是都没有，所以那时候班上也是县长在去，是偶然再有但是再有水啊。
没有啊，只是很多人而已也很多外来客。以前就是到那边都是朋友，去那边都会是认识的，通过在地人才会去。
Ira, ciok, takula, ayaw. Anini masyaw to no Taiwan to isap maaw. Patay o hiya o kalang wa ay tumatin. Masyaw to ko rutok ma. Mapatay.
盖完了，然后我们就过来看，我真的很失望啊，因为没有水，没有电，晚上黑黑的，哇，那时候真的很害怕，你知道吗？然后隔壁又是一个溪，新店溪，然后每一次要用到水，我们全家小孩子就到新店溪里面下去在那边玩水，顺便洗澡、洗头。尤其是就是傍晚已经天很暗，但那时候都没有人，想说大家，因为那时候水感觉很干净了，就这样子就一直这样子过了生活。然后有一次遇到那个干旱，整个新店溪都没水，然后我们就不知道怎么办，用水都没有，已经没有电了，还没有水。你知道我妈多辛苦哎，她拿2个水桶，好像我们又回到那种很辛苦的日子。她就挑着那个2个水桶，然后从那个我们就这样下，现在是比较矮，以前很高哎，下去很深了。那就这样提着那个水桶，然后就下去，跑到哪里你知道吗？就现在交流道的那个桥下那边还有一点水，就在那边提了两桶水回来。
还是有原住民的朋友嘛，哥哥姐姐啊，是有些亲戚在台北啊，舅舅啊什么的。心情不好的时候就去看看他们啊，聊个天啊，喝个酒啊，现在啊还是一样啊，去那些地方啊，只是很浅而已啊，泡个水而已。大池啊、大兴啊，那些地方啊，第3水门啊、第2啊、第1啊。从最上游开始游下来，从大池游到第一碗，再到第2，再到第3，然后烤肉回家，一天的训练就完成了。啊，以前都是很深呐，水都很深，现在就是都变很浅。以前都是灭顶那种，现在都不会灭顶。很深才有那游泳的感觉，踩不到地的感觉才好。
Thank you. Thank you, Posak, for sharing this very beautiful film. And so I think to grasp the cherish the time, we might just go into the Q&A session first. So if any one of you would like to raise the questions, please send a message. And I think the moderator will open the audio for you. Shidong, are you there?
Yep.
Okay. So if to prepare for the Q&A sections, maybe I will start with a little bit conclusion. We are very grateful for inviting Posak and Jane to this event. I think it's a very great and significant opportunity to connect Jeju Island and Taiwan from both of their significant works and artistic practice, which has been shared at this panel discussion. And if there's still a little bit time, I would love to bring a little bit note and thought from these discussions. So for who might be curious about this title of this event, The Flowing Image, Weaving Time, actually was inspiration I quoted from Fijian writer scholar Epeli Hau, and who kind of really inspiration to me, and who also dedicates to developing this kind of alternative historiography from the perspective of oceans and water as a space of connections and intimacy, and how the indigenous South Pacific Islanders could respond to this kind of change and challenges brought by modernization and development. So the idea he proposed of the islanders and this kind of new history and narration, I quoted from one of his writing, In the Past to Remember. He kind of examined the linguistic construction of the Fujian language and the historical basis of their oral narratives on the landscape to rethink the past, the present, and the future. So if all of you allow me, I would love to share this very beautiful quote, which I think really resonate with the previous discussions that Jane was talking about, the time and translations in her work, and also Posak talking about water as a metaphor and this kind of methodologies she using in the documentary film. So I quoted that he said, the past is ahead in front of us. It's a conception of time, help us retain our memories and to be aware of its present. What is behind us, the future, cannot be seen and is liable to be forgotten, really. What is ahead of us, which is the past, cannot be forgotten, so or to be ignored, for it is in front of us, of our mind's eyes, always reminding us of its presence. The past is alive in us, and so is more than a metaphorical sense. The dead are alive. We are our history. So I was using this quote to connect Posak and Jane is because he brought out a very interesting conception of time with the geographical location and direction that we usually using our language in English or maybe Mandarin. The future is always ahead and past is always behind. But from the Pacific Islanders, their language, the past, which is they have known, is in front of them, kind of embodied in the landscape from those islands, and the future is unknown, so it's behind us. And this is the idea and the inspiration for this panel discussions. And so I was wondering if there's any participants who love to share their thoughts, or maybe not the questions, please leave a message at the chat. You can find the button below for the chat discussions. For before that, I will invite Jeffrey, a friend from Malaysia, to give a short note because he's also one collaborator with Posak of making this film. Jeffrey, so if you are here, please unmute your audio. And welcome. Would you like to share a little bit thoughts and notes before we start the Q&A section?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alice. And I must say it's beautiful, your film, Jane. And of course, Posak, it's also nice to watch the video again and see all of them again. It's been 2 years. No, it's been 4 years. We did this project in 2018, way before the pandemic. So me and Posak, I went for a study trip to Taiwan in 2017, and it's to explore indigenous narratives. I'm from Malaysia, and there is some hypothetical connection between indigenous people in Malaysia and Taiwan. So I decided to explore that in Taiwan. And with that, Posak was one of the indigenous artists that I collaborated with. And in 2018, we traveled to 3 different villages. Actually, more than 3, but I would say just this 3: Hau, which is Lanyi Island, Fataan, which is the home village, and Jiaobitan, which is the urban indigenous village in Taipei. And then from the collaboration, she did her filming, and for me, I did a lot of interviews and also take portraits. Because my project background was mainly to collect oral narratives, but in return, I gave them a portrait of themselves to document that moment of exchange. So it was an instant portrait. Yeah. Well, the project went on for maybe 3 years. I visited many more other villages, and Posak in turn was invited to come to Malaysia, and we brought her to 5 different villages in Malaysia, from the sea to the river, to the source of the river, to the highlands, and an urban one as well, an urban village. So there is really an urban cultural exchange.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. And so I think I will start if allowed me, I will start each question for Jane and Posak for bring up, if that's okay. So I'm following by previous discussions. I think the last discussion was talking about the water and the oceans as a kind of space for negotiation and mediations. And also we have this opportunity to connect Jane with OCSC, and Posak actually is a really coincident opportunity that Jane's have the opportunity to doing research further. I'm really curious about after community of parting, you actually also do a very profound and engaging research about Asian transcultural myths and goddess related to the oceans and also waters. And I remember you mentioned this kind of metaphor actually brought back this kind of sentiment of compassion. And I was wondering, would you like to share a little bit this research? And you might be interested doing the Injuju maybe further in the future, possibly in Taiwan.
Yes, and Posak, thank you so much for your film. I really enjoyed viewing it today and also previously, and I think it's very beautiful how it how the river is the central part of the film really, and how these different generations are also interconnected. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that first. And I think after Community of Parting, actually Community of Parting in some ways began for me when I had an encounter with, the border between North and South Korea. And I found it somehow, I needed to find a way of approaching these questions of borders differently. But then, after finishing Community of Parting, I think what I really took away from engaging with shamanism in Jeju was thinking about it as also as an aesthetics of relation. So I began to think a lot about what kind of, the role of shamanism in Jeju as a space that has faced has endured this kind of historical turbulence, and then this aspect of compassion. I became really interested in the notion of compassion, and I think the project first, this upcoming project first started out looking at different figures of compassion, also how it is, known in Buddhism and has traveled, from India via China to East Asia. But then I think a more recent turn has been to really think about the interconnectedness of island and coastal spaces that are connected not by land but by sea. So I began to look into the Kuroshio current, or the black current that flows from Southeast Asia northward alongside many countries, Taiwan and up to the Ryukyu Islands in Japan, and also up to Jeju. And I began to trace these different, because of this current, the current has really been a kind of artery and connecting point between different geographies, largely outside of central power, so spaces that by nation states would maybe be considered in the past as peripheral or very far away from the capital cities, but they were themselves interconnected through the current, and the maritime exchange, and also cultural exchanges between these spaces. And so one of the things I was interested in looking at, or am interested in looking at, is how this long-term cultural interaction or exchange can be seen in the cultural practices of island spaces and coastal spaces, so that there are certain objects or symbols also in ritual practice or in spiritual practice that recur across the Kuroshio cultural sphere. That's one way of looking at it. And so this summer in Jeju, I will go to Jeju in about a month and start filming, and I will continue somehow filming with the community of divers that I filmed with, also for Community of Parting, and with Kusunan, the shaman from Community of Parting, passed away, but her daughter is a shaman apprentice, so she will inherit her mother's shrine. She's one of the few younger hereditary shamans in Jeju. So I've been looking at these different myths and sea deities related to Jeju, which are very much also seasonal deities, in the sense that they're connected to the divers. So the divers will offer to the sea goddess every springtime for prosperity and safety when they dive. And there's certain elements of the ritual, for instance, the making of straw boats, and also giving offerings of fruit to the sea goddess. And so there's some of these. I think I'm very interested in how oceanic cultures, or island and indigenous cultures, both are very distinct, like have their own cosmology and ecosystem that is very much connected to the land, but then being in the proximity of water, how water is also something that connects different spaces, so it's I guess I'm interested in this kind of also, can one think of an alternative mapping or orientation between locations, not for example, Jeju is a space that continues, I think, to be have a sort of ambivalent relationship to the South Korean state because of historical factors, but also because it's a space that has been challenged, like, you know, the lifestyle has been challenged by, you know, very heavy tourism, but also militarism by the building of the Kangyang naval base. You know, so many island spaces have somehow faced similar, you know, that certain infrastructures have been imposed upon spaces that by the central government has been seen as kind of, you know, we can put maybe a base in Jeju because it's not going to disturb, you know, the urban center. You know, so I think many of these spaces, I mean, another space that, a place that I have also been to in the past and where I continue to follow the developments, for instance, is Okinawa, which, you know, in many ways, Jeju and Okinawa have many relationships historically, but also in terms of building different alliances at present, because they're faced with similar kinds of challenges of military infrastructure and also like a history of violent history. You know, so I'm interested in just, I think this initial time in Taiwan that I hopefully would be able to come and visit would mainly be to, you know, to understand, you know, how different perspectives and perceptions. So I thought also what your film showed, Posak, in terms of how the, you know, because the relationship to water is so important and to the river, but then with the developments that is happening, it's not only that it's changing the infrastructure and the environment, but it's a much deeper how can we put it, like it's a much deeper imposition also, you know, so there's, because it's also, if you can no longer follow the river, you know, how can you orient yourself? Or maybe I will stop there and also just I would be curious also to hear some of your thoughts on making this film and also thinking about some of these thoughts of what this means for your community, you know, that, you know, these developments and changes are unfolding.
Thank you, Jane. I think Posak would you like to respond first?
As I grow up, like me, I always really a fear of river because I'm not really like get in touch with the river anymore. I think this already happened like from many generations before. It's already like that. So it's kind of like because it's not really in my village. It's not a lot of ritual or like when I asking old people, they will tell me a lot of old ceremony they would do, or old way of fishing, something like that. But this kind of thing already lost in my experience when I grew up. I no longer have this kind of experience. So it's kind of like I know I kind of afraid of the river, but I want to take the river like this is the way I don't know, and I don't know how to get in touch with this river or this kind of culture, but this is the way. If I follow the river, I can something like I can know more about that. So it really is like the way for me to know about my cultures. And in Fataan, there is some young people also, they want to bring back the old ritual or traditional culture to know about more about that. But I think because we cannot go back to like in the past when we have this kind of ceremony, the way of lifestyle. But I think the way we can more practice, or we try to find what's the way we can do, is also the way we tracing back the old traditional. I think the way is like we need to start to do something like with the environment or with the culture, something like that. Yep.
Thank you very much. I think one audience, Inka, has proposed one question for both Jane and Posak. So the question is regarding of the time. And I think it's focusing on the Jane's and Posak's in the film. For example, Jane's film actually incorporated like for the different clips and video from Japan and Korea, and this kind of historical themes. And in Posak's films, actually, a lot of Amis elders express the ideas of time in Mandarins, not the modern tongue. So Inka was asking both of you about the meaning of this kind of mixed language in the context, whether their rhythm of their image is specific related to this kind of your approach in the image, or your approach in this kind of rhythm image aesthetic, specific related to colonial and historical trauma. So Posak would like to answer first.
Okay. And actually, because my mother tongue is not really good, so actually when I talk with people, they will always try to use the language which I understand. And but actually, when I grow up, my language is kind of always mix all the language together, especially when I talk with my grandparents. They always mix the language with Mandarin, Amis, and Japanese, sometimes with Taiwanese, something like mixed together. So when I was kid, I actually don't know this. When they call one things, I actually don't know which language they use. I just know what's the meaning of that. So it's like kind of like, for me, it's kind of natural for me to always have this kind of mixed language happen to me. I'm quite used to of it. And I think it's not just happened to me, also it's happened to all of my generation of Amis people. We always lost our language, always have this kind of mixed language when we grow up. So yeah, I think this kind of situations kind of you always happen to me. So it's naturally in my film also.
Just a quick question, like the quote from the scholar from Pacific Islanders, when they talk about their language in terms of the future, the past, the present, they have a very different understandings, like we using in Mandarin and in English, for example. And I'm just wondering the language in Amis, when they're talking about time, do you think their approach of time kind of have a different understandings by using their mother language?
Because my mother language is not so I I don't really know the exact difference between the Mandarin or the my mother language, the Amis language. What's the difference of the idea of that? Maybe
Yeah, I think although maybe it would take some time to understand the really traditional culture, but in your work, the river kind of like provide of a context that outside of the linear time. And so the interview and this kind of memory back and forth when you raise the questions in your documentary film, and people like pulling out their memory to a certain period of time, like pulling into the river. So the river embodied this kind of mortal timeline. That's a very beautiful approach. And so I was wondering, like at the very end, Jane, would you like to answer the questions regarding this language and time that raised by one of the participants? Maybe indicate part of the video that's related to different diaspora community from different locations like Japan, China, and the Germans, when they speak with different language mixing in the community of parting. Would you like to share a little bit thoughts on this?
Yeah. There are a lot of languages somehow, and I think and also Shaman Kusonans, I mean, Mal, the language that she speaks is also very different from mainland Korean, so there's that aspect. I think I wanted to, and this is also because of my own background, I think it was important for me somehow to bring in many different diasporic voices to the piece. Most of the people, the speakers in community of Parting are individuals that I've known for quite a long time, so friends or people I have been in conversation with over the years and who have very different backgrounds. And I think for me, the voice, I've been interested in the voice as something beyond, just meaning, just communicating meaning, semantic meaning, but also the voice as a texture and as a resonance. So I like how, I'm very interested in how the voice itself, with its accents and rhythm and intonation and so on, it's almost like an instrument. It tells so many things about a person and a person's state of mind and emotions and so forth. So in that way, I think voice is something that I'm always drawn to, or that several of my works are also in some ways very much carried by the interweaving of different voices. And there's this sense that the voices also sometimes blend into each other. It's not, they become a collective more than individually distinctive, so in that way, maybe I think about them a bit as a kind of stream of a collective stream, or like a stream of consciousness that somehow influence each other as well, or they mirror each other and carry forth maybe this stream of Bari in some way, and they offer different reflections on it. And I think some of the voices are also poetic voices. And so some of them, for instance, there's this political philosopher and poet, Yi Qianghua, who was born in Jeju, but who has lived for many, many years in Japan. So the way she uses language, even though she speaks Japanese, she integrates certain words that are Korean or English, so I'm interested in this kind of, how, I don't know, maybe in some ways like how can language also be approached differently, and there's something the juxtaposition of language or voice and image, it's like I'm curious about the space that can be created when the voice and the image are not necessarily what we expect, the non-diegetic image, so the voice is something that can open up the image to another understanding, or the other way around. So in that way, I think oftentimes, there's a kind of shifting back and forth of editing to image and editing to voice, so in that way, the voice is also something that can carry images from one space to the other. So I think sometimes it's used in that way, where the voice, maybe in the short clip we saw where we hear about the divers, and then suddenly we continue to hear about the voice of a diver, but it cuts into another scene, so the way that the voice is able to connect unexpected impressions.
Yeah, I think I would love to point out the shaman chanting scene. That I think it strikes me a lot by knowing the shaman's role in Jeju Island historical context. Actually, it's more like a memory device that could carry on this kind of memory from the Jeju massacre. There are certain contents and certain things that kind of taboo cannot be talked about, and kind of using shaman chanting as a kind of memory to passing on by generations. And so I think that's a very interesting when you bring about the voices and the languages, because that's indicate or assume there are certain things that we could use language to discuss and talk about, but there are certain outside of historical narrative matters that cannot be really addressed by language, but using shamans chanting as a kind of another voice also are very significant place in the Jeju historical positions here. And I think that would be such amazing to have you here, and also Posak for bringing this kind of discussions. I think this event would be just like entry point for invited friends from Taiwan and also from other countries to knowing more about the connection and historical context between Jeju and Taiwan, but also to bring more discussion in the future, maybe when Jane have the opportunity to visit Taiwan, to bring up more interesting questions for your future projects at a later research journey. And I would love to thank all the participants who joined us tonight, and the organizations OCAC and Shidong organized this event, and every friend who support this panel discussions. And thank you all. If you have any further questions, please feel free to message OCSC or email us, and we will love to pass on to Jane and Posak. Thank you once again for this amazing representation here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Or if anyone wants to stay, I think we can spend a bit more time as well.
Yeah, and thank you so much for moderating, Alice. It was really wonderful also.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. I was really hope I could join your research trip, the upcoming research trip in Taiwan. And I would definitely encourage every friends and participants here, if have any interesting to share, and welcome to share with OCAC, or anything like interesting message, a reference, please share with us. I think this is one of the purpose of organizing this event, like introduce Jane to friends in Taiwan and connecting more for the future research. And
yeah,
so
today,
sorry, Shidong, please.
No, I just noticed that today we have many, some friends here are actually like friends from Taidong or Hualien. So actually they are the friend that we visit so much in this few years. Like almost every time we just visit them and just stay in a place or hang out. So I believe when Jane is here, we will visit them for sure.
That would be really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think Jane has shared a little bit her interest about this future research. And so I was wondering, Shidong, if you know anyone who love to have a further discussions or conversation with Jane, could approach you, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually the Mao here, yeah, I think we can, we will need a lot of support from the Mao as well. Wow, when Jane is here.
Great, beautiful. And I think because this is a more like a public event, and maybe we could organize another like group discussions. Welcome all the friends that joined us tonight. Could also have another discussion or conversation with Jane and Posak. And Posak will also join this trip too. More like for more details, and might be providing more reference for Jane's to understand the context of indigenous culture in Taiwan. What do you think? Would that be possible?
Yeah.
I think that would be more possible, because I think there are a lot of thoughts and ideas that people have to process after joining us for Jane's and Posak screening tonight, and have a general ideas about their approach. So it would be great for them to process a little bit, and maybe Shidong organize another conversations involve the friends might support or have any assistance for providing more reference in the future. That would be really fantastic. But for the panel discussion tonight, I think that would be all. And please feel free if any participants have emergency need to, end the discussion first. And we always have the opportunity to have more conversation in the future. So thank you all. And is there anybody want to have a final note?
Thank you. No, that sounds really great to have that. And then maybe also when hopefully it becomes possible to visit this summer, maybe we could we could organize, some gathering or something in person with friends. It's always very nice to somehow be in the same room.
Yes, that would be perfect. There's always more to discuss in the more like in-person discussions, right? And yeah, very looking forward for the research, and we're very looking forward for the trip that the Jane and Posak will have in the summer. Finger crossed for the government to open the border soon. And please be safe and well at the meantime. And so, Sudan, I think we will end this panel discussion first and organize another meeting later in the future. We will find the time for everyone. And thank you. So I probably will leave the screen and feel welcome to message all of us if there's any further questions or further notes and message want to share with us all. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you
so much. Yeah, it was
great.
long. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And thank you so much for organizing it, and Posak for your talk. I think we'll probably be in touch, on email. I wonder with the status of the COVID situation, do you have any sense from the authorities about if the COVID rules are going to become